you exclusive photographs. By far, the best yet are in from the Titanic. For most of this century,
That is big.
The night of April 14th to 15th, 1912, the RMS Titanic collided with an iceberg, and the Atlantic bore witness to one of history's most infamous disasters. Survivors would later describe a sound that haunted them for the rest of their lives.
And you can see how the metal holding the hot coals is concave, it's bent inwards, which shows that the boilers were working when the ship went under. But another key piece of evidence lies elsewhere.
The roar of steel tearing, a dreadful crescendo, as the ship's stern lifted high into the freezing water before vanishing into the depths. For decades, the world has fixated on the bow, that eerie, upright monument captured in countless photographs and documentaries, seemingly frozen in dignified repose. Yet, just a few hundred meters behind it lies the ship's back half, a scene of chaos and obliteration so extreme that even seasoned explorers hesitate to linger there. So, how come no one is talking about the Titanic's back half? The last moments of the Titanic. On March 31st, 1909, the keel of what would be the largest moving human-made object on Earth was laid in the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Designed by Thomas Andrews, the RMS Titanic was one of 3 Olympic-class ocean liners commissioned by the White Star Line, meant to offer unparalleled luxury on the Atlantic crossing. At 882.5 feet long and displacing over 52,000 tons, she promised to be both a floating palace and a technological marvel. Her interiors boasted a first-class dining saloon larger than many hotels of the day, Turkish baths, a gymnasium, and even elevators. Her builders and many in the press claimed her to be practically unsinkable. On April 10, 1912, the Titanic left Southampton, England, bound for New York City. On board were some 2,224 people, wealthy industrialists, immigrant families seeking a new life, and a crew of nearly 900. The itinerary was simple: Southampton to Cherbourg, France, then to Queenstown, now Cove, Ireland, and across the North Atlantic to New York. What should have been a routine crossing quickly shifted toward peril as the ship steamed west. Multiple ice warnings were sent to the bridge by wireless operators on April 14th, but an overconfidence permeated the voyage. At 22 knots, or about 25 miles per hour, the ship maintained near top speed through the icy waters of the unforgiving Atlantic. And then came the iceberg. It was 11:40 p.m. on April 14th, 1912, roughly 400 nautical miles south of Newfoundland, Canada, when lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee spotted an immense iceberg looming out of the darkness. The sea was unnervingly calm. Without breaking waves against an iceberg's base, visibility was worse than it should have been, leaving the white mass almost invisible until it was dangerously close. First Officer William Murdoch ordered a hard turn and engines reversed. At the last possible second, the Titanic's starboard side brushed the iceberg along a stretch hundreds of feet long. The steel plating scraped, and the iron rivets that held it together, some modern analysis shows, of brittle quality in icy waters, either popped or sheared, opening seams in the hull. Water flooded inward at an astonishing rate. Modern estimates suggest that once the iceberg breached the plating, water entered at nearly 400 tons per minute through ruptures that crossed the first 6 of her 16 watertight compartments. These compartments were a notable innovation. 15 bulkheads that could be sealed by electrically operated doors, in theory, made the ship highly survivable, so long as no more than 4 compartments were compromised. What designers did not foresee, and what would prove fatal, was that these bulkheads only extended partway up the hull. They were watertight horizontally, but their tops were open, allowing water to spill from one compartment to the next, as the bow sank deeper under the creeping weight of seawater. Captain Edward John Smith, a seasoned mariner planning to retire after the voyage, quickly grasped that the Titanic was mortally wounded. Orders went out to seal bulkheads and begin lowering lifeboats. But overconfidence in the ship's unsinkability had a deadly ripple effect. Titanic carried only 20 lifeboats, enough for about 1,178 people. about half of those actually on board, far short of what would have been needed even if every boat were fully filled. Shockingly, this wasn't because of physical constraints. Titanic could have carried up to 64 lifeboats, and the cost of installing many more would have been trivial compared to her $7.5 million price tag. Instead, maritime regulations of the day were woefully outdated, based on ship tonnage rather than capacity, and White Star Line complied only with the minimum required. So, at 12 a.m. on April 15th, the Titanic's distress signals began. Wireless operators sent CQD and SOS calls that were heard as far as the RMS Carpathia, about 58 miles away, and the Mount Temple, about 50 miles distant. But no help could arrive in time. Below deck, passengers scrambled. Orders were unclear. There had been no lifeboat drills since departure, and many crew members were unfamiliar with the mechanisms for lowering boats. As lifeboats were swung out on their davits, advanced mechanisms designed by Alexander Carlisle, they often launched underfilled, some with only a handful of souls aboard, despite capacities of 65 or more. Among the aristocracy, acts of courage and heartbreak unfolded. John Jacob Astor IV insisted his pregnant wife board a lifeboat. She survived. He did not. Isidore and Ida Strauss refused to be separated and went down together. American socialite Margaret "Molly" Brown helped load boats and later urged her oarsmen to return for survivors, only to be refused for fear of being swamped. Wireless operator Harold Bride and others stayed at their posts, keeping distress calls going as long as possible. For nearly 2 hours and 40 minutes, Titanic clung to the surface, her bow dipping ever lower as seawater chewed away her buoyancy. Some passengers didn't fully grasp their peril until the last illusions faded. Lights flickered and then died, and the ship took on a noticeable list. As the clock passed 2 a.m., the angle of the deck grew steep. The stern lifted perilously, propellers exposed to the cold Atlantic air. In those final minutes, the chaos reached its peak. Collapsible lifeboats A and B were launched too late, one swamped and the other overturned. Dozens of men, women, and children clung to upturned boats or the furiously cold water, where near-freezing temperatures sapped strength within minutes. Testimony from survivors and modern deep-sea scans have also revealed that the ship did not break cleanly in two as once thought, but was violently torn apart under immense stress as her structure failed. Hundreds of feet of steel gave way, collapsing first-class cabins and decks as the vessel's backbone snapped. At approximately 2:20 a.m. on April 15, 1912, the great ship slipped beneath the waves in a final dramatic plunge. By dawn, the Carpathia arrived to gather the survivors scattered across lifeboats, 706 souls out of more than 2,200 who had begun the voyage. Bodies were recovered from the sea over the next few weeks. An estimated 1,500 lives were lost. In the wake of the catastrophe, inquiries in both the United States and Britain revealed glaring institutional failures. Lax regulations that allowed so few lifeboats, no requirement for 24-hour radio watches, inadequate safety drills, and poor emergency preparedness. The U.S. Senate inquiry harshly concluded that a state of absolute unpreparedness and indifference to danger aboard the Titanic were significant factors in the tragedy. The Titanic's story did not end at the bottom of the North Atlantic. For decades, the location of her wreck was a mystery, but that changed on the 1st of September 1985. Discovery of the wreck. For more than 7 decades after April 15, 1912, the RMS Titanic lay undisturbed in the deep North Atlantic, beneath nearly 2.4 miles, or 3,810 meters of seawater. Scholars, adventurers, and scientists speculated endlessly about where the unsinkable ship might lie on the ocean floor. But the technology of the early 20th century was simply nowhere near capable of finding her in the vast, featureless abyss. It wasn't until the mid-1980s, long after the last survivors had passed away, that the world's greatest maritime mystery would finally be unlocked. The man who would solve that mystery was Dr. Robert D. Ballard. a marine geologist and oceanographer with degrees in geology and geophysics, and a formidable reputation in deep-sea exploration. By 1985, Ballard had already helped develop advanced deep-sea vehicles like Alvin and had spent years exploring mid-ocean ridges and other undersea frontiers. But nothing in his career had prepared the world for what was about to happen. The search for the Titanic was launched aboard the U.S. Navy research vessel Nor in August 1985. The mission was a joint venture between the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts and the French Research Institute. Ballard and French oceanographer Jean-Louis Michel were in command. Their objective was part science, part technological test, to push the cutting edge of deep-sea imaging with a suite of new tools, while methodically scouring a swath of the Atlantic seabed where Titanic might be found. The centerpiece of this new toolkit was a remotely operated deep-sea vehicle named Argo, a 16-foot sled equipped with a remote-controlled camera capable of transmitting live video to the surface. Unlike manned submersibles, Argo could spend extended periods near the seabed scanning wide areas without the life support limitations that constrain human divers. Using Argo in tandem with early sonar systems like Angus or acoustically navigated geological underwater survey, the team pioneered a strategy that would change deep-sea archaeology forever. They would not try to find the massive ship directly, but rather search for the trail of debris it left behind. On the early morning of September 1, 1985, after weeks of painstaking searching along overlapping swaths of ocean floor, Argo's camera feed finally flickered with the unmistakable silhouette of human-made metal. It was scattered across the dark seabed. At about 1 a.m. local time, the first confirmed object appeared on the video monitors, one of Titanic's massive cylindrical boilers, encrusted with rust, but unmistakable in form. That boiler, lying amid bits of debris on the plain below the waves, told Ballard and his team that they were very close to the wreck they had been seeking for so long. Once that trail was identified, the rest of the discovery unfolded in a blur of excitement. Argo was guided across the seabed until, at last, the forward portion of the Titanic, the bow section, came into view. Fragments of huge steel plates, railings, and other recognizable structures rose out of the darkness like ghostly monuments. The hull was tilted upright, and despite more than 70 years on the ocean floor, much of it retained its original shape. Where the bow had slammed into the mud upon impact, it had settled into a kind of eerie stillness, with anchors, hatch covers, and remnants of decks still discernible. Headlines around the world soon reflected that tone. The unsinkable ship had finally been found, nearly intact, after 73 years at the bottom of the ocean. Ballard's careful approach to the discovery helped ensure that the story of Titanic's final resting place was told with unprecedented clarity. It was not simply the largest shipwreck ever found, but the most complete early image anyone had ever seen of a vessel lost to history. The debris field alone, stretching for miles around the main sections, spoke volumes about how the once magical steamship had met its brutal end. Engine parts, scattered cargo, and even personal items were strewn like artifacts from some ancient battlefield, frozen in a moment of sudden destruction. Contrary to some early rumors, it wasn't a dramatic burst of light or a sudden sonar ping that confirmed Titanic's location. It was careful, methodical work, scanning the seabed meter by meter until the unmistakable signs of human engineering emerged from the black Atlantic depths. Argo's first look at the bow section lasted only minutes. The team withdrew to regroup, but those initial images were enough to captivate the world and rewrite what we knew about the wreck. Over the following days of the 1985 expedition, Ballard's team documented not just the bow, but also the extent of the wreck's fragmentation. They observed that the hull was split into two main pieces, bow and stern, lying roughly 600 meters, or about 2,000 feet, apart on the seabed. The debris field surrounding these massive sections contained hundreds of thousands of objects, from coal and crockery to twisted beams and personal artifacts, each an unmistakable testament to the violent forces that tore the ship apart in April 1912. The discovery of the Titanic's bow, with its soaring lines and still identifiable structure, had an almost mythic quality. It confirmed what many had long suspected, that the ship's breakup was real and that much of her forward section remained intact despite the catastrophic sinking and the immense pressures at depth. Yet it also brought a startling sense of reality to the disaster, uncovering the tangible remnants of steel that had once supported grand saloons, luxurious cabins, and bustling decks full of life and expectation. When the world first saw those undersea images in September 1985, it marked a profound moment of connection with the past. Yet, the discovery was only the beginning. Why no one talks about the Titanic's back half? When the Titanic struck the iceberg on April 14th, 1912, water began pouring into her forward compartments. For over 2 hours, the flooding progressed methodically. By the time the bow dipped beneath the surface, much of the forward structure was already submerged internally. This slow, steady intake of water equalized pressure inside and outside the hull, allowing the bow to descend like a submarine, opening its flood valves. As it plummeted through the frigid Atlantic, it maintained a streamlined orientation, minimizing resistance and hitting the seabed in a relatively controlled manner. The stern, however, followed a radically different trajectory. When the ship finally broke apart, the aft section remained afloat for several minutes, suspended in the Atlantic with vast air-filled compartments still intact. These enormous pockets included cargo holds, refrigerated storage, and hundreds of third-class cabins. Unlike the flooded bow, the stern's internal air created a ticking time bomb of pressure. As it began its descent, the water around it exerted roughly 1 atmosphere of pressure for every 10 meters of depth, mounting steadily as it sank toward the abyss. At nearly 3,800 meters, the difference between the surrounding water pressure and the trapped air became catastrophic. The stern did not simply settle into the mud, it imploded violently. Steel hull plates that had once withstood storms and collisions were overwhelmed. Inward forces crushed decks down upon each other, ripped bulkheads from their fittings, and peeled structural steel away from the frame. Mechanical systems, cabins, staircases, and walls were twisted into chaotic tangles, flattened or collapsed under immense pressure. Only the massive steam engines, each towering like a 3-story building, retained a semblance of their original form, resilient against the crushing forces that obliterated everything around them. The implosion occurred mid-descent, before the stern ever touched the seabed, leaving a fossilized imprint of physics acting with brutal efficiency. Today, the stern rests roughly 2,000 feet from the bow, deeply embedded in sediment, almost unrecognizable to anyone expecting the grace or symmetry seen at the front. For modern submersibles, this distance is technically manageable, but the terrain is treacherous. The debris field between bow and stern resembles a fragmented city rather than the remains of a ship. Twisted hull plates, warped bulkheads, and colossal metal structures lie in chaotic heaps. Early objects encountered in this field are light enough to be carried by currents: coal from fuel bunkers, pairs of leather shoes, luggage forced open by collapse, shards of china. But as explorers approach the stern, the wreckage thickens, the chaos intensifies, and navigation becomes a tense exercise. Sonar maps grow hard to interpret, and submersibles must battle strong currents swirling unpredictably around the dense piles of metal. The physics of the stern's implosion explains this terrifying contrast. The air, trapped within the hull, compressed catastrophically under the pressure of the ocean. In an instant, decks collapsed, steel peeled outward in inverted layers, bulkheads snapped free, and interior furnishings were shredded, dragged along by the violent rebound of compressed air. The bow appears calm, if haunting. The stern, on the other hand, embodies chaos, destruction, and the unflinching power of natural forces. This stark asymmetry is why, historically, the stern has received far less attention. When Dr. Robert Ballard's expedition discovered the wreck in 1985, the camera lenses naturally lingered on the bow. That portion of the ship emerges from the darkness with recognizable features, delicate railings, anchors, hatch covers, and cargo cranes still in place, offering an image of solemn preservation. By contrast, the stern is a sprawling tangle of wreckage, its collapsed decks and twisted steel offering little for the romantic imagination. Even high-resolution photography struggles in this section. The submersible's lights illuminate only fragments at a time, revealing a scene more akin to industrial devastation than maritime archaeology. The debris surrounding the stern tells a story of sudden catastrophe. Huge steel plates lie bent outward, twisted into impossible angles. Staircases, domes, and fragments of walls have been hurled dozens of yards from the central mass. Coal, luggage, and small personal items are scattered through the sediment, creating a haunting tableau of sudden chaos. The wing propellers, once shining symbols of engineering pride, now rest partially buried beneath their own weight, bent and distorted by forces far beyond the ship's design. Even the stern's position relative to the bow contributes to its visual and psychological impact. At approximately 2,000 feet away, it's close enough for comparison, but far enough that the chaotic debris field emphasizes the separation of the two halves. The bow, flooded and streamlined, represents controlled destruction. The stern, air-filled and violently imploded, represents the sheer unpredictability of physics in action. Scientists have described it as a fossilized record of a mid-water catastrophe. The collapse was not gradual. Explorers, filmmakers, and historians alike have sometimes avoided dwelling on the stern, not for lack of curiosity, but for the psychological impact. It is unsettling. It is unromantic, almost grotesque in its disorder. A relentless reminder that human ambition is fragile and that catastrophe is indiscriminate. And yet, it remains. Lying in eternal darkness, embedded in sediment, twisted beyond recognition, the stern continues its slow collapse, a stark counterpoint to the serene, iconic bow. Even today, when ROVs illuminate its wreckage, the stern's destruction is shocking. Massive steel structures, once decks, walls, and cabins, are crushed into compressed cavities. The hull is torn open in places, mechanical systems twisted. The immense steam engines remain as solitary sentinels amid this chaos, nearly the only recognizable elements. Every observation underscores the terrifying lesson of differential physics in action. The bow, flooded and waterlogged, sank peacefully. The stern, still buoyant and filled with trapped air, imploded catastrophically. The Titanic's back half is more than a structural ruin. But wait, there's more. Ongoing decay and biological consumption. Images captured by Dr. Robert Ballard's 1985 expedition cemented the public perception of the Titanic as a frozen memorial, a dignified relic of human ambition and tragedy. Yet, lurking behind this haunting tableau is a far more violent narrative. The stern, shattered and mangled, now slowly being erased by forces both physical and biological. The ongoing decay of the wreck is not simply the work of corrosion or time. It is driven by a microscopic predator discovered in 2010, a bacterium named Halomonas titanicae. Scientists isolated this species from rust samples collected on the wreck and were astonished by its voracious appetite for iron. These extremophiles thrive in the crushing pressure, cold temperatures, and complete darkness of the deep sea, turning the ship's steel into a veritable buffet. Rusticles, the orange, icicle-like formations that hang from the wreck's surfaces, are not passive rust. They are living, dynamic communities of bacteria that consume iron and excrete fine metallic residue. Together, these microbes remove between 0.1 and 0.25 tons of iron from the Titanic each day, a pace that guarantees the wreck's slow but relentless disappearance. The stern, already decimated by the violent implosion that occurred during its descent on April 15, 1912, is particularly vulnerable. When the ship broke apart, the aft section still floated, filled with massive air pockets, cargo holds, and third-class cabins. The ocean's pressure eventually overwhelmed these compartments, crushing decks and peeling hull plates inwards in a catastrophic implosion. That chaotic collapse left the stern exposed, splintered, and riddled with fractures. Perfect conditions for rusticles to feed. Steam engines, once towering symbols of Edwardian engineering, remain among the few recognizable structures, but even these massive pieces of machinery are slowly succumbing to the microbial assault. Thin steel plates have disappeared entirely. Load-bearing structures are weakening, and collapsed decks continue to fold under their own weight. Experts predict that within 20 to 50 years, the recognizable structure of the Titanic will vanish completely, with the stern disappearing first into the sediment, leaving only an unformed mound of iron oxide. By contrast, the bow remains comparatively intact. Its earlier flooding before sinking created a streamlined descent, allowing it to hit the seabed with less destructive force. Though it is also under attack from rusticles, its structural integrity has allowed it to withstand the onslaught longer. In imagery captured by submersibles, museum exhibits, and documentaries, the bow continues to evoke tragic dignity and romantic melancholy. Visitors can still see railings, cargo cranes, and hatch covers, each a silent witness to the ship's grandeur and the lives lost. It offers a haunting beauty, a tableau that comforts the imagination while providing a tangible link to the past. The stern, in stark contrast, presents a scene of terror. Its collapsed decks, twisted bulkheads, and tangled hull provide no elegance, no order, no graceful lines for the mind to cling to. It embodies the sheer brutality of the sinking. The collective focus on the bow in public memory is as much psychological as aesthetic. The stern's mangled remains challenge our desire for narrative control and romantic tragedy. To look at the stern is to confront the raw forces of physics, the compressive might of the ocean, the unpredictability of structural failure, and the merciless efficiency of catastrophic collapse. It reminds us that the Titanic was not simply a story of a ship that could not sink. It is a story of human ambition, engineering limits, and the violent indifference of nature. The stern's destruction strips away the comforting melancholy the bow provides, leaving only evidence of chaos and death. In essence, the wreck is a dynamic, evolving sight. Each day, rusticles consume more iron. Tiny bacteria transform solid steel into sediment, and the deep sea slowly reclaims the Titanic. Sediment buries fragments, seawater corrodes edges, and the sheer weight of the wreck's components continues to collapse weakened sections. The bow, once iconic, will eventually be indistinguishable from the surrounding seabed. The stern, already obliterated by implosion and now by microbial activity, is the first to fade, erasing the starkest evidence of the ship's final moments. This ongoing decay transforms the Titanic into more than a shipwreck. The wreck is changing every day. Halomonas Titanicae thrives in extreme environments such as high pressure, near-freezing water, and total darkness, and they feed on iron. The Titanic's massive steel hull, weighing tens of thousands of tons, turned out to be the perfect habitat. Explorers first noticed them in the late 1980s during dives following the wreck's discovery by Robert Ballard in 1985. They look like icicles or stalactites of rust, dangling from railings, beams, and broken hull plates. Scientists call them rusticles, fragile, porous structures formed by microbial colonies. Each rusticle is essentially a living community of bacteria feeding on the iron of the ship, excreting oxidized material that slowly grows outward in branching, coral-like shapes. But these formations are far from harmless decorations. Rusticles represent an active biological process that is gradually dismantling the Titanic. 90 tons of iron per year. This process is why many experts believe the recognizable Titanic will not survive indefinitely. Oceanographers and archaeologists studying the site often estimate that within 20 to 50 years, large portions of the ship will collapse completely. Thin structures like railings, deck supports, and cabin walls are already disappearing. Eventually, even the iconic bow, once photographed standing upright in the darkness, may collapse into the sediment. The stern, already mangled by implosion during its descent in 1912, will almost certainly disappear first. Time-lapse observations from deep-sea expeditions have already documented significant deterioration. Between the late 1980s and the 2010s, entire sections of the deck collapsed. Railings that once framed the bow have partially fallen away. The famous captain's bathtub, once clearly visible during early dives, has disintegrated completely. Some internal rooms have caved in, and the upper decks are sagging toward the seafloor. Despite the decay, the wreck is not an empty wasteland. Marine life does gather around the Titanic, though not in the way reefs teem with colorful fish. The deep ocean at nearly 3,800 meters is a harsh environment. Temperatures hover around -1 to 2 degrees Celsius. Sunlight never penetrates, and food is scarce. Still, the wreck acts as a kind of artificial reef. Various deep-sea creatures have been observed around the site, including amphipods, sea cucumbers, brittle stars, and certain species of deep-water fish. Crabs and shrimp sometimes crawl among the debris field. These animals are attracted by the complex structure of the wreck and by organic material that accumulates around it. Bits of marine snow drifting down from above, or microorganisms living on the rusticles themselves. In essence, the Titanic has become a small ecosystem in the abyss. Over time, rusticles become heavy and brittle. They eventually break off, drifting downward like orange snow and dissolving into fine particles on the seabed. When this happens, they expose fresh metal underneath, allowing new bacterial colonies to form and continue the cycle of consumption. In this sense, the Titanic's wreck is alive, not in the sense of movement or consciousness, but in the relentless activity of the deep sea. Water pressure, currents, and bacteria continue to reshape the wreck, obliterating familiar forms while creating new, alien structures from twisted steel and sediment. Rusticles hang like orange stalactites from beams, staircases flatten into the sea floor, and the very engines, once proud symbols of technological mastery, are gradually losing their integrity. The Titanic's story teaches a lesson about perception, history, and human psychology. We focus on the bow because it comforts, because it allows for a tragic but elegant story. We avoid the stern because it disturbs, because it exposes the chaotic, uncontrollable, and terrifying forces that claimed over 1,500 lives and crushed the ship in a few short minutes. Yet both halves are equally important to understanding the ship's story. The bow memorializes the vision of human ingenuity. The stern memorializes the brutal reality of its limits. Together, they are a record of ambition, failure, and the inexorable power of the ocean. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.